Hey, welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. I've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. Wow, it's been a while, Zach. We have had Christmas, we've had everything else in the week, and we kind of took a break there for a week, but we're glad to be back. We hope everybody had an amazing Christmas, whatever it is you celebrate, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. I don't even know what else there is out there. Whatever there is, but Zach and I, we had our Christmases. My daughter and my son got everything they wanted and more, probably. We'll see. Zach, how was your Christmas?
It was very good. As we were talking pre-show, I had the privilege to bless my mom with tickets to the Rose Bowl. And so that is probably my favorite thing. Is my mom went to the Rose Bowl 40 years ago, and this will be her second time going, and my first time. And so for me, it's a bucket list trip, but for mom, I think just to be able to bless my mom with that is really exciting. And yes, she is a diehard Buckeyes fan. So count two more Buckeyes in the crowd for those in Pasadena.
For sure. I'm excited to see what it's gonna be like crowd wise, right? I'm kind of expecting like maybe a bit of a 50-50 type of crowd. We'll see what it looks like out there, but I know the stadium shot can always be a little deceiving with the way the colors are and everything. So I'm excited to hear from you on how everything is out there. Should be a good time.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. I'm excited too because like my mom got to go 40. I'm excited to hear her perspective. I'm excited for the perspective of the crowd's gonna be, but I'm also excited for her perspective, just like how it's changed from 40 years ago to now. So
Yeah.
um, I'm hoping for a different result because when she went, they lost to USC. So
Oh,
yeah, so this is a gamble. This is a huge gamble. um,
it all depends on how
but
superstitious you are. So
yeah, I'm not superstitious. We don't believe in that stuff. So um but I'm gonna wear a specific jersey because maybe I am a little super. No, I'm not. I'm not actually superstitious. I'm fake superstitious. Thanks,
Oh
Doug. I
man.
appreciate it, Doug.
Yeah, Doug says that's amazing, Zach. Thanks for being here, Doug. We also got John here. He says it's been weird seeing the show for the last week, but hope everybody had a great Christmas. Yes, John, hope you had a great Christmas as well. It's been weird not doing the show. I kind of had like, thoughts to myself. It's like, why am I not up in my at my table doing my show? But got to spend time with family and everything else, so that's a good time. But Zach, we have stuff to talk about as we always
So
do. So let's just go ahead and get right on into it because our first topic is the transfer portal rankings. All right. So whoops, still getting in my groove here. Transfer portal rankings. So I've gone ahead and I was gonna just look at the on three transfer portal rankings to start, but then I posted them on social media and everybody said you got to look at 24/7 too. You got to look at all this other stuff. So I'm not going to bring like rivals up here and everything else too, but I'm going to bring both on 3 and 24/7 up here. Now, you might be thinking, JR, why in the world are these transfer portal rankings different? Are they not ranking the same thing? No, they're not. So here's the way they do it. On three, what they do with their transfer portal rankings is they try to figure out, did your team improve? Did your team stay the same? Or did your team get better? So for them, Michigan lost not a whole lot of talent, but they brought in a lot of talent. So that's why they have Michigan at number one. But 24/7 has Michigan at number 12 because all 24/7 does is says how much talent did you bring in. They don't look at what you lost and who left or anything like that. They look and say how much talent did you bring in. That's why you see a team like Nebraska much higher in 24/7 because if you know anything about Nebraska football, they had like some 150 players on their roster, and now with things going down to 105, they can't have as many walk-ons, so they got a ton of players entering the portal. It's not so much that people hate their coaches, it's because of the size of their team was and everything else. And so that kind of skews Nebraska a little bit with on three. What I'm learning by doing all this is that there's really no perfect transfer portal rankings. You just have to kind of look at everything and say, okay, that makes sense, and go from there. So Zach, with all of that being said, what's your thought on these transfer portal rankings?
well, I think I appreciate on three's approach because it's talking about the team holistically. But it makes sense if you're 247 and you're 247 junkie. they are never really accounting for how much better your team is getting. They account for how much talent acquisition you have. So I feel like it makes sense how 247 is doing it. But like, Nebraska's a really good example. They've lost like what, 30 players in the portal and have
Yeah.
only gotten 11. So like 247 is going to have Nebraska up there because they've gotten a lot of commits, but they've lost almost 3 times that many, which I think is just, it's staggering. The thing that really jumps out to me, and it's less about rankings and more about just amount of commits. You have Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon all like in like the 3 to 6 commit range, and those are the teams left in the playoff. And to me, I feel like Ohio State and Oregon especially have been pretty strategic in who they've gotten. But to me, it just kind of shows how broken the system is because they can't do much work in the portal. They have to be strategic because they're focusing on a quarterfinal game right now. Whereas, Wisconsin, they don't even have a bowl game. They can just kind of go out and do whatever, which I think it even gets back to something you said a few weeks ago. Is like, what's the point of bowl games anymore? Which I don't know if I necessarily fully agree with that take, although Cam Ward sitting out after the first half may change that theory. But I just don't. It's hard to argue that this system works right now, with seeing the lack of commits for Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State.
I've been kind of looking at it a little bit differently. So you think about the NFL draft, right? The NFL draft, the worst teams in the league get the first picks and stuff like that, right?
Oh,
I look at this as kind of like, okay, congratulations, you're in the playoffs, but you being in the playoffs also now hinders your ability to go out and get as much talent because you are so devoted to winning your game, winning a national championship, all this stuff. But a team like, I don't know, say like Wisconsin, right? They are not in a bowl game at all. So what is Luke Fickell's number one priority right now? Go get talent, right? They're 5-7. They didn't make a bowl.
yeah.
And this is kind of what I was talking about when I gave my hot take about bowl games earlier on in the season, which was like, if you don't have a bowl game to worry about, if you don't have the playoff, I want to say the playoffs to worry about. Obviously, you wouldn't be the playoffs, but if you don't have a bowl game to worry about, you are completely focused on going out there and getting as much talent as possible. And Wisconsin has gone out there and got some good talent. They were able to get 2 of the top 10 Big Ten defensive transfers into their program. And they've done pretty well on offense, but it's not. They don't have like a Roman Hemby or a Jonathan Mendoza like Indiana got, or like who did Michigan get? The Justice Haynes or something like that. Like you don't, or the Dane Key to Nebraska, those type of guys,
Yep.
right? And so I don't know if I'm a fan of it, but I see it kind of working, right? To where these teams that didn't make a bowl game, now they get to focus so much more on, let's just get more talent for next season. And to me, it's like, if we are trying to be like the NFL, which I'm not saying we should, and I'm not saying college football should, but if that's what we're trying to do, this kind of makes more sense.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we stick with it because I think it's a horrible system. It's a horrible scheduling. Like, I think so much is off. We saw that with Bo Perbula. But at least if I'm looking at it from an outside perspective, not trying to like be critical of it, that's probably the only good thing I have to say about it.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. And I appreciate what you're saying, because I think one of the things that I think we both agree with is that there needs to be things that force parity in college football. And the draft is what forces parity, and the salary cap forces parity in the NFL. And to a degree, it works, right? Like you see the best. The Browns stink every year. No offense to you Browns fans, but the Browns stink every year. But that's less about talent acquisition and more about management. Like how good of a manager and team organizer are you? How well are you coached? How are you good at building a culture? Whereas right now, there's really no cap other than scholarship limits. And so to have ways to force teams, the better teams, to have some sort of cap on them is good. Ultimately, I think the cap has to actually be in the NIL, on the NIL end. I agree. I think the schedule has to change, but it's interesting to see the natural consequence of the way the schedule is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the schedule just it impacts things so much with the way everything goes on. They have got to fix it. I don't know if I'm smart enough to say that they got to do this, they got to do that, or anything else, but the point blank, you should not have players not being able to compete for the national championship, which they have worked all season for. Like I said, Bo Prabula, like he should be able to work with his team and work toward the national championship.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he's not able to because Drew Aller is coming back and he wants to play, so he has to go into the transfer portal. It's a messed up situation, but there are aspects of it that are helping teams like Wisconsin. Really fast, Zach, any thoughts on teams with the transfer portal and what they've done? Minnesota is pretty high up there in 24/7. They're not as high in the on three because Minnesota did lose some players. Cole Cabana, who was committed to Minnesota from Michigan, he is now going to Western Michigan instead, so they lose out on the running back, but they had plenty of other running backs in the transfer portal there as well. Any thoughts on any of these teams and what they've been able to add or what they've lost or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think they just, or on Christmas Eve they got Malachi Coleman from
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska, and
That's
that
huge.
it's huge because they lose Daniel Jackson, and huge part of their offense this year. So getting a big time receiver. Rutgers is doing some work in the portal. Only 4 guys, but you know, some good players that they've gotten. That I think are going to be big for them. DT Sheffield, I think we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'm curious about, Michigan got Mikey Keene
Mikey Keene from Fresno
from
State.
Fresno State, and it's interesting. Like I think there's definitely some wisdom there getting a guy who I think can be a bridge to Underwood. Certainly would have started for Michigan this year, right? Like would have been, I think, better than everybody that they've got. I think I might be frozen here. Sorry, guys.
You're good now.
I'm good. Okay, sorry. I don't know what just happened there. But it certainly would have been, I think, better than the 3 quarterbacks that they had this year. So I thought that was a really shrewd move by Sharon Moore to get someone like a Mikey Keene to kind of be the bridge there. I, I'm curious what they're gonna do on the defensive side of the ball in the portal, because they lose Josiah Stewart, they lose Kenneth Grant, they lose Mason Graham. And there was reports that Kenneth Grant was coming back. I'm like, there's no way he's coming back, and he's not. He's going to be a first round pick in the NFL draft. So I'm surprised that they haven't addressed that yet. So I think that's I'm curious to see what Michigan does there, because I think if they get a couple of big time defensive recruits, I think you're looking at Michigan maybe making a run at the Big Ten next year. And our guy Sonny, he brought it up. Illinois, not necessarily getting a lot of transfers, but a lot of retention. And Altmaier back, we've been saying that offensive line, if they can keep that offensive line together, that's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big Ten next year.
Yeah, Illinois was the team I was going to bring up because Illinois went out there and basically took Wisconsin's defensive line and said, "We'll take that, thank you." They took those guys on over, and I like what Brett or what Brett Bielema is doing here by trying to shore up the line of scrimmage before anything else. He knows that he has Luke Altmaier. He knows that he has somebody who's in the backfield that's going to be able to, in Luke Altmaier, who's going to be able to lead the team. He just has to figure out this trench play, this trench work, and he trusts his defensive coordinator to to develop and make the secondary better as well. So you go out, you get depth at the defensive line, so that way you can rotate more guys in and out. I love what Brett Bielema's doing. It doesn't really show on the rankings because on 3 they're 8th, and then on 24/7 they're 11th. But I think they're quietly having a very good portal from what I'm looking
Mhm.
at and what I'm viewing, because it does go so much more than just how many top tier talent can you get? How many of this? How many of that? It does talk about retention, bringing guys back, bringing guys that you want back, and making sure that guys who leave are guys that you're okay with leaving. And time will tell, but yeah, bringing back 18 starters to return next year after going 9-3 this year. We'll see what happens in their bowl game. They could be 10-3. That's going to be huge for Illinois next year.
Yeah,
Like I've said
yeah, for
before,
sure.
Brett Bielema, one of the most underrated coaches, not just in the Big Ten, but in
In
all
the
of college
country,
football.
in the
Yeah,
country, absolutely.
great coach, great coach. All right, Zach, let's take a look at the
D-
conference. Or go ahead. What do you
I was
say?
gonna say, not to just make it a Ohio State homer show, but I do think it's worth mentioning Ohio State, while they have not been super in the portal, to get Oinawa from Rice, Max Clare from Purdue, and who's the other? Philip Daniels from Minnesota, to shore up the edges of that offensive line. We have been on Justin Fry's butt since last year for his inability to recruit and get guys. He deserves a lot of credit here to get those 2 tackles. Many think Onawa might be the number 1 tackle in the transfer portal this cycle.
Yeah, and the ratings are not proving that. I shouldn't say not proving that, or not projecting that, but if you listen to the NFL scouts and stuff like that are on Twitter, many of them are saying if he would have came out, he could have possibly been the number 1 tackle drafted this year. So it's definitely interesting the way they do these things. But yeah, I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you're ecstatic with the addition of Philip Daniels. You're ecstatic with the addition of Ethan Awinawa. And you're definitely looking at at least one more offensive lineman to come in. I'm not checked in with Ratrell Perry from Central Connecticut State recently, but he's one to look at. But if you're an Ohio State fan, you just need a kicker. Get a kicker.
Oh my gosh.
And we'll see what goes on
Oh,
there.
man. Goodness.
Let's see. Sonny says Altmaier back, Gabe rumored back, Xavier Scott rumored back, JC Daniels potentially come back due to the Paiava rule. Yeah, that JUCO rule is really shaking things up a lot right now, and it's really changing the way things are gonna work. It's kind of crazy.
Remind me what that rule is.
So the Vanderbilt quarterback, Paiava, he played in JUCO, and I don't think it's forever now, but it's at least for this year. If you played a year of JUCO, you now get that year back in college football. It's really weird, but
What?
your JUCO year does not count against you. So Diego Pava gets to come back, and anybody else who spent a year in JUCO, that year does not count against them. Super weird, but
That's lame.
it's the NCAA being the NCAA.
Yeah.
Not necessarily against it, but it's just very weird, and it's again another thing that coaches are having to adjust to on the fly.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can you do this?
Listen, if you somehow have a 9-year college career, there's a problem with the system. I'm just throwing that out there.
I agree.
So
I agree. One more, and then we'll move on to conference records. Friend of the program, Mike Alibaba, says Minnesota still needs another portal O-line or 2 and a linebacker before next fall, but I like that PJ is loading up at positions of need. Gophers have a great chance to be really competitive next fall. Yeah, the Malachi Coleman addition was huge to me. I think that was really good for them. They've also brought in some players from the FCS level, which has been good. I mean, overall, I've been impressed with what PJ Fleck has done. I think he kind of learned something this past year when he went out and got Max Brosmer, and now he's saying, it's good to get into guys and develop them, but if you can bring in guys who are ready to come in and start, I think everybody is kind of adjusting at their own pace, and it feels like PJ Fleck is beginning to adjust now. And it's good for him, it's good for the program, and it's good overall for the Big Ten. The more these Big
Mhm.
Ten coaches start learning this stuff, as long as you can keep your culture intact, that is the big thing, right? As long as you can keep your culture intact. But if we know anything about PJ Fleck, we know he's somebody that builds culture, builds his team around an idea, an identity, and if he can continue to do that, you can look for Minnesota to have another good year next year.
Yeah, agree. Totally agree.
So, good stuff. Good stuff there. All right, Zach. Let's talk about the. If I can bring it up here. There we go. The conference bowl records. Independent is number one because they're 2-0. UConn and Notre Dame. This does include the playoffs as well. The AAC is 6-1. The Big 12, Big 10, and MAC are all 4-2. The SEC just means more is 4-3. The Sun Belt is 3-3. The Conference USA and Mountain West are 1-3. The ACC 1-9. And then the Pac-12 0-1, which Pac-12, whatever. Zach, thoughts on how the bowl season has been going? Do you think these records matter? Do you think they're any big deal? Like, are you somebody that looks at the SEC and says, like, how in the world are you 4-3 if you're winning all these hypothetical matchups? Like, what's your thoughts here on these?
I mean, I think these records used to matter. They used to matter a lot more because you didn't have the opt-outs and you didn't have all this other stuff kind of surrounding them. It like Miami, Iowa State's a really good example. Like Miami probably wins that game if Cam Ward doesn't opt out after halftime. And there's a lot of there's a lot of buzz around it, whether you agree with it or not. But the problem with it, and I'm not even necessarily blaming Cam Ward for this, but the problem is how do you evaluate Miami and Iowa State? And I think the reality is you can glean things, but I don't think you can definitively say things. And I don't think you could before either. But I think it's just much more apparent that you have to take a nuanced approach. And so I think one thing that we're learning is that the ACC, I think, is easily the weakest conference in the Power Four. And I don't think it takes a lot of nuance to figure that out. Like the one win was Syracuse over a wounded Washington State team. And it took a while for them to put some distance there. You look at the rest of the ACC teams, they have not looked like they've belonged on the field with most of the teams they've played. And now Miami would probably have a win there if they hadn't benched, or if not benched, if Cam Ward hadn't gone out. And that's where some nuances is required. On the flip side, I do think you can take away that maybe the Big 12 is a little better than we thought. I think PSU Jim, brought up BYU. John bringing up BYU too. College football nerds made this point, and I think it's a fair one. It's why wasn't BYU considered over SMU in the playoff? And I understood the committee, like they basically looked at the end of the regular season as the end, and then they looked at the conference championships and kind of disregarded those losses in a sense. So like I understood that rationale and I agreed with it. But I do think that BYU, I think has more of a legitimate gripe than some of these other teams like Bama, because they actually beat SMU. And I'll say the other thing that to me it kind of signals is maybe maybe Arizona State, you look at what they did the last 3 or 4 weeks, maybe it gives us an indicator of their chances against Texas in a few days.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. We're going to break down the round 2 games here in just a few, but um I always go back to the coaching, right? We discussed this and we talked about it when we kind of previewed and did some score predictions, which are so impossible to do for bowl season, but we always try to do them just to see. Um,
Yep.
To me, it's all about coaching, right?
Yep.
Who's the better coach? I thought Greg Schiano was going to win that game, and it was going to be a good feather in his cap for the Big Ten and his ability to win and be a good coach. But they lost that game later on. Now, Dylan Edwards and his athleticism is a big part of that, but at the end of the day, they lost that game. Lincoln Riley, is he really a better coach than Mike Elko? At least on that day he was, because guess what? Mike Elko, kind of the same boat, had a huge lead over USC, but then they were able to come back in that one as well. So for me, I don't know if I necessarily say like, the ACC is a bad conference, but I do look at this and say, I think the ACC has some weak coaches in their conference overall,
Yeah.
right? But we've known this about Mario Cristobal. Mario Cristobal is not a good football coach. We've known
Mhm.
this for a while now. He can get good talent. He's a very good recruiter, and he can get your offensive line right. He is
Mhm.
not a good football coach. He's not good at managing the game. He's not good at managing the clock, all that stuff. Like, he's not good at that stuff. But he can bring in talent, i.e., Cam Ward, all those other guys. But he can't win you the game when you're coaching. Kind of the similar thing with other, like, you could go down the line and look at these other coaches, and at the end of the day, coaching is often what wins you these bowl games. With so many opt-outs, so many uncertainties, everything else, it's oftentimes what wins. And I'm not trying to take a shot at Deion Sanders here by saying this, but like, the BYU head coach is a really good head coach. He's shown that
Mhm.
time and time
Yep.
again. Deion Sanders got some really good talent with his sons and Travis Hunter and Shador Sand, like all these guys. But are we really going to think Deion Sanders is a really good coach? Like, maybe, but I've
Mhm.
not seen it throughout his entire time. Now, give him credit. He took a 1-11 team, had him 4-8, and now won 8 games this year. So you got to give credit where credit is due. But at least the in-game coaching ability, I think I forget the BYU coach's name. I apologize, but I think he coached
Is it
circles around
Sataki?
Sataki.
Sataki?
That's right.
Yeah.
It was something kind of crazy, but Sataki. I think this just shows how good of a coach he is. That not only were they able to win that game, but win it decisively. And
Yeah.
when everybody thought, "Oh, Colorado's got all this NFL talent, they got NFL draft insurance and everything else," but Sataki says, I'm still the better coach. I still got the better overall team, and we're gonna win this game. We're not gonna just win it. We're gonna win it decisively."
Yeah. Well, and I think to that point, I think it does show kind of the separation line between the above average teams to the good teams. So like Colorado, if you look at their Colorado's a good example because I think you see the coaching problem, but I think you also see the reality that in an imbalanced schedule world, Colorado didn't play anybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're the best teams they played all year at Nebraska, Kansas State, and BYU, and they lost
Yeah.
all three. And that like they didn't play any of the tough teams in the Big 12. They didn't play Arizona State. They didn't play BYU until the bowl game. They didn't play Iowa State. So you had
Which
this.
is what I was saying for Nebraska that entire time when people were ranking Colorado. I was like, Nebraska literally beat them, guys. And what is it, a fluke? Like,
Oh, they beat the tar out of them.
right? They beat the Tar because they're the better team, and Matt Rule's the better coach.
Yep. Yeah.
But
I think we've talked a lot outside of the Big Ten other than Greg Schiano. I feel like Chris Kleinman's a heck of a coach at Kansas State. I felt like the Kansas State Rutgers game was more of an indictment that Rutgers is still not there yet athletically. Like I think they could have been if not for all the injuries. But I think the reality is like the roster, and they had their full roster that they expected for the most part. They expected Commandant Guy not to play, but I
right.
mean they lost a lot of guys over the course of the season that were out for the year, and I think it's just like Kansas State's a good football team, and they have athletes. We saw that with Dylan Edwards, and Rutgers is still not in that upper tier yet. And I think that's part of what bowl games show too, is like where are you in relation to where you want to be? So I think we saw that even in the playoff with Tennessee and Ohio State. I think a lot of people thought Tennessee had maybe ascended. And I think Ohio State basically said, no, like you're still you're still a top 8, top 10 team, but you're not an elite level team yet. You don't have elite level talent everywhere. Doug Shepard earlier in the chat was like, the speed of Ohio State just outclassed them. And I think that's a big piece of this too.
Yeah. And when Ryan Day is using it the right way.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has questioned all season long that Ohio State has one of the most talented rosters. It's just been, have the coaches use them the right way? Have they been calling the game the right way? That's the biggest thing.
Well, one other thing I want to bring up, because we talked about Matt Rule, I was very grateful that Nebraska won the way they did. Because, and I know there's
been overshadowed with all the Raiola talk and everything.
Yeah, like Raiola needs to be quiet. But that's the addendum. But Rule needed, like, Nebraska and Matt Rule needed a win where there was a threat that they could lose in the last couple minutes. Yep. And like, they're up 20-2, and all of a sudden it's 20-15, and you're like, they're gonna lose again.
It's happening again.
Yeah. And then they don't. And I think that more than anything, that's the thing that has needed to change. And that's a hard thing to get to remove out of your culture, is the expectation that you lose those close games. And now all of a sudden you're reversing that trend. And they've done it a couple times this season. That's a big deal. And I just want to, if there's Nebraska fans watching right now, I just want to tell you, Boston College is not a great team, right? Not a good team. They're in the ACC, which, we're seeing it. It's not a great conference and not a well-coached conference, but you guys needed a win like this. And I think it builds a ton of momentum going into next season, especially with how you guys are doing work in the transfer portal.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, this is what this Nebraska program needed. Now it's Matt Rule's job to build off it, right? They needed to get to a bowl game. Maybe they didn't win as many games as they were hoping for this season, but they got to the bowl game. They were able to win the game close, something that they've struggled to do ever since the Scott Frost era and everything else. So, I mean, at the end of the day, maybe you're not ecstatic about it if you're a Nebraska fan, right? Like, maybe you think, oh, we left a little bit more there this season, and I say you're not ecstatic about the season because you think maybe we left a little bit more. But at the end of the day, the way things ended, you're right. It kind of ended the way you needed to. You made it to a bowl game. You won your bowl game. You won your bowl game close. It kind of does show that the program is building. But nobody wants to talk about that. They just want to talk about Dylan Raiola running all over the field and him sliding and everything else, which I guess we could talk about that if we want to, but everybody's already talked about it. Yeah. So. Oh boy. All right, Zach, let's hit a commercial really fast, then we'll come back and we will start previewing some of these second round matchups of the playoffs. So we'll hit a break really fast, and then we'll come back and we will talk about Texas, Arizona State. Stay with us. Have you ever wanted to watch all 22 film, that film the coaches watch? Well, now you can. Introducing the Coaches Film Room. Over at Minutes to Sports, former college coach Zack Smith breaks down film of the most relevant teams in college football with a bit of a Big Ten lead. It's not free, so you'll need to sign up for the Colonel tier, which is $25 a month, but I can attest to you that it is far more worth it than that. With about 4 to 8 games per week, this is worth so much more money, not to mention Zach's analysis, making you a smarter football fan. Go check it out. The links are in the description, minutestosports.com. You won't be sorry. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle, we are going to talk about the Texas Arizona State game. Like and subscribe if you don't mind. Definitely helps us out. We've come back to you for the first time in over a week now, but we're glad to be back, and we're glad to be talking college football, Big Ten football, everything else with you. So, Zach, we kind of hinted at it a little bit. We were talking about it. Like, maybe this means the Big 12 was maybe a little bit better. Does Arizona stand a chance against Texas? Well, Texas didn't really face anybody this season other than Georgia, and they lost to Georgia in both those games. And now they find themselves facing Arizona State, who has been very hot here to end the season. They blew Iowa State, I believe it was, out in the conference championship game. Cam Scadaboo has had a good end to the season. He kind of had a little bit of Heisman hype there at the end, but obviously not really on the level of Ashton Genty, which is fine. He still had a fantastic season, not taking anything away from him. But overall, at the end of the day, this Arizona State team, I think, does stand a chance. But I don't know how big of a chance it is. Spoiler alert, I'm picking Texas to win this game, but if there was a team in the SEC that you told me could lose to a Big 12 team in the playoffs, I'd probably pick Texas because we haven't seen them play anybody this season. And the
Mm-hmm.
team that we did see them play, that is somebody they lost to both times. Your thoughts, Zach?
Ironically, people will not know this. Arizona State is the second best team that Texas has played all season, according to Sagarin.
Wow.
The team that obviously they played that's better is Georgia, who they lost to twice. Texas is 0-2 against top 10 teams in Sagarin, 3-2 against top 30. Arizona State sits at 11th, above South Carolina, above Florida, above LSU. All those good old SEC teams.
The good old
Now,
boys.
yeah, the good old boys. Now, that's not me making a pick. I'm just saying it's intriguing to me because I think something that caught my attention just doing some base level prep. You look at their last 4 games. You don't want to look at teams in a vacuum too much, but you want to look at their trajectory. Kansas State, they dominated that game. It was 24-14. It was 24-0, and then Kansas State tacked on a couple scores late. I mean, so shut them out for a while.
Yeah.
BYU, who PSU Jim was talking about, BYU, they were up 21-3 at half, and then 28-17. That BYU scored with about 8 minutes left to make it a 1-score game, but BYU dominated Arizona State dominated. BYU had to get their way back in that game. You look at what they did to Arizona, which Arizona stinks, but I mean, 49-7. Iowa State, who's a pretty good offense, right? Like they were going up and down the field against Miami, which Miami stinks defensively.
Miami's got a bad defense.
But they held Iowa State to 341 yards. They turned them over 3 times. Obviously, Scatabo had just a ridiculous game running the ball. But I look at a team like Arizona State, and the real question for me is, can their lines just get a draw against Texas? Because that's where this game's going to be won ultimately. I think the likelihood of Texas being able to bully Arizona State on both lines of scrimmage is pretty high. But if Arizona State can get a draw, like upset alert.
Yeah. No, I that was exactly where I was going to go as well. Specifically, the defensive line for Arizona State. This Texas offensive line was heralded as one of the best offensive lines in the country at the beginning of the season, and they've had some issues. They were not a Joe Moore. I don't believe they were a Joe Moore Award finalist at the end of the season. But this Arizona State defense, they have not been able to get pressure on the quarterback this season, like you might think a team like them has been able to do. Only 20 or 21 sacks on the season. That's not very high. I mean, Boise State has like 51 or something like that so far this year. And so for me, like, can they get pressure on Quinn Ewers is going to be one of the biggest things. Can they do something to disrupt this offensive line for Texas, whether it's with their defensive line, with their blitzing, whatever else it might be? And we know that if Quinn Ewers is pressured, he will get disrupted. I mean, Quinn Ewers, for as much hype as there was about how amazing he was and how he's going to be the first round pick, he's not lived up to that. Specifically, not so much because of the arm talent and that kind of stuff, but because he does get rattled. And that's going to be Texas's bugaboo. That's going to be why Texas doesn't win the national championship this year, in my mind, is, well, number one, they're on like their 5th string running back because they had like 3 running backs get hurt in the preseason camps, which does suck for them. But number 2, Quinn Ewers, when he gets pressured and he gets rattled, he is not the same quarterback at all. You do not see the kind of calm, cool nature out of him like you do out of a Dylan Gabriel or whoever else that you kind of need to see, especially in his, what is this, his 2nd or 3rd year starting in college football,
I
second
think
year.
it's second year. Yeah.
You should be able to see that from, but you haven't seen that from him this season.
Hmm.
So if Arizona State can overcome some of the issues they've had with not being able to get pressure and to get sacks, and they can start doing that against Quinn Ewers, that's going to be huge for them. But I also look at this and say, Kenny Dillingham, he's a very young coach. He's inexperienced in the playoffs. Sark was in the playoffs last year. Granted, he did lose to Washington, but he's got at least a little bit more experience in this one. I'm with you, Zach. This Arizona State team, I think, is better than some people give them credit for. But I just look at it and I say, I don't think Arizona State is there yet. I think they can be there
Yeah.
maybe someday, but just not yet. Sam Levitt, I give him all kind of props and credit. He's not turned the ball over very much this season. I think he has 3 picks on year or something like that. Like he's done a good job. But Texas's defensive line is going to get pressure on him. And he's
Yeah.
done pretty well under pressure this season, but Texas's defensive line is going to get pressure on him.
Yeah.
Is he going to start turning the ball over? Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah. I think the thing that concerns me for Arizona State is if Texas can limit Scatabo and put Levitt in obvious passing situations, I think that's when Texas's defense really feasts.
Yep.
And now I'll say this: Clemson struggled to run the ball, and Cade Klubnik was able to hit them over the top. And Arizona State has a receiver over 1,000 yards, Tyson, who is really good. But can Levitt make the same type of throws that Klubnik was making? Like Klubnik made some great throws in that first round game. I don't know. Like I think Levitt's really good. I don't know if he's like Klubnik's ceiling is first round pick. He hasn't played up to that,
Right.
but that's a ceiling. I don't know if that's Levitt's ceiling, and I'm not sure that their receivers can really match the athleticism on the outside with the Longhorns defensive backs.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I don't like using this term because I think it often has a negative connotation to it. And I don't give a negative connotation to it. I think some guys, this is just who they are. And I think it works for some teams. But Sam Levitt just feels like a kind of a game manager to me. The way he operates, the way he doesn't turn the ball over, stuff like that. He's not somebody that's going to go out there and win the game for you like a Cam Ward will, obviously, or anything like that. But he's somebody who is going to operate the offense, operate it well, and take care of the football, which is good. But I think in a game like this, with as much talent and athleticism that Texas has, you need a game changer. And I felt like Curtis Work was that a little bit at Indiana, not after the injury as much, but and that's why I was kind of higher on Indiana, especially. And I know I'm not going to bring that topic back up, because we kind of fleshed it out last show, but that's kind of what I'm getting at here with Sam Levitt. I don't think he has the difference, or I haven't seen. I shouldn't say he doesn't have it. I haven't seen the difference maker out of him that's going to win you the game like you need to beat a team that is as highly as athletic and talented as Texas is. Because as much as crap as we give Texas, they still recruit super well. They still have the best athletes on their team. They haven't played anybody, but they still have some of the best athletes. And at the end of the day, unless you are just purely outclassed and everything else, like, you have the better athletes, you're most likely going to win the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're spot on here. I think the other thing, and this is my feel for a number of these games, I think the layoff actually really hurts certain teams. Texas has already played. They're already in game shape. They're already in rhythm. Arizona State has to come in and play essentially the best lines that they've played all season. And they've got to punch up with a team that's already played, and they have not played yet, in 30 days or 24 days, something like that. And that can be a real challenge if you haven't played in a while and you're playing the best team you've played.
Yeah, no, I agree. Score predictions. Let's talk about it, Zach. My score prediction in this one is Texas 31, Arizona State 13. What do you got?
We're similar. I've got 34-10. I just it stinks because PSU Jim said it, rooting for ASU but expecting Texas to win by 3 TDs. I think I got a little over my skis picking Clemson over Texas. And I just think it's going to be a similar thing. I think statistically Arizona State looks very intriguing, but I think it might be a similar thing. Although I think Texas is going to be more a suffocating win. Like I think Texas kind of was able to run all over Clemson. I'm not sure it's going to be like that, but I do think Texas will suffocate them. I think it'll feel like a typical like SEC bully ball type of game.
Yeah, I think that's the most likely scenario. Like I said, I wouldn't necessarily count out Arizona State completely. I
Yeah.
think Arizona State has a chance in this game. I don't know what percentage chance I would give it, but it's unlikely. But you know, unlikely things have happened all season long. So
Yep.
who knows? We'll see what
Yeah.
happens. But both our Penn State fans here, Penn State guy and PSU Jim both said 35-14 for Texas. And John taking the score from the Ohio State Tennessee game and putting it on this one 42-17 Texas. Yeah, I think Texas is going to win this one by at least a couple scores and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, possibly like 3 touchdowns. We'll see. So I'm with you, Doug. I hope ASU wins, but wouldn't bet on it at all. So
Yeah.
Penn State, Arizona State percentage chance 0-0-1. That feels like it. It feels like
Yep.
it. So all right, Zach, let's talk about Georgia Notre Dame. I think this one is much closer, and I think this one has a whole lot more talking points to it.
Yeah.
Georgia is only a 1.5 point favorite. Notre Dame actually did open up as the favorite in this one, but it shifted very quickly based on people's betting. But Notre Dame did open this one as the 1.5 point favorite, shifted because of the way people betted. But now Georgia is the 1.5 point favorite in this one. Over under of only 44.5. Zach, Gunnar Stockton in this one. Riley Leonard with his ability to run, but he's not really been the best thrower all season, barely over 2,000 yards throwing this year. This is a really interesting game. I think this has all the makings to be kind of a low scoring defensive, kind of beat up bully fight type of deal. What's your thoughts on this one, Zach?
Oh man, I think Mills being out hurts them. It hurts Notre Dame so much because he was their big guy up front.
I think it changes the way they call their defense too. He was such an integral part.
Yeah, and that I don't think it means they're definitely going to lose, but I don't think people realize how pivotal he is of a piece he is on defense. If there is a team, though, in the playoff that can deal with injuries, it's Notre Dame. I mean, they have been just incredible at navigating that offensive line situation. And I will say this, like Georgia, for as highly touted Georgia is defensively, ironically, Arizona State allows 336.9 yards per game. Georgia allows 336.5 yards per game. They allow more rushing yards than Arizona State does. They allow 127.8 yards per game on the ground. Notre Dame loves to run the ball. And while I think Georgia can terrorize you with Jalen Walker and their other edge, I'm blanking on his name right now. But they can terrorize you.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. They can terrorize you up front. Michael Williams.
Yeah, Michael Williams.
Yeah. And they've got Malachi Starks. I think pass defense can be will be really tough on Notre Dame. Notre Dame doesn't want to throw the ball. They want to run on you. They want to set you up with the pass so that they can run. And I think that could be the key matchup to this. I mean, it feels dumb to say, but it's like if Notre Dame is able to run with Riley Leonard, with Jeremiah Love, with Price, if they're able to kind of control the clock and run and score touchdowns in the red zone, I think that mitigates some of my concern with the defense.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Georgia's defense, and Georgia's defense should be spectacular, right? With all the talent they've been able to acquire and everything else. Now, Georgia did play a very tough schedule this year. As much as we do rag on the SEC, like they did play Tennessee, they played Ole Miss, like they played Texas,
Yep.
like they did have a tough schedule this year. So their numbers don't quite like if you're looking over here to the side where their numbers are, like their numbers don't quite look great, but
Mm-hmm.
Kirby Smart knows how to get these guys up in big
Yep.
games.
Yeah.
And Gunnar Stockton is going to be a hurdle that they have to overcome. But I have to feel like Kirby has a plan for that. He's not going to go into this game thinking Gunnar Stockton is Carson Beck and have him throw the
Right.
ball around. He's going to have a plan for this. And the way I look at this is it comes down to coaching in my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can Kirby Smart prove that he's the best coach in the country? Can he prove that by taking down Marcus Freeman, who's made some coaching blunders at his time at Notre Dame, but overall, he's won big games. He beat USC last year, and he's won big games. He had the issue with the 10 men on the field against Ohio State and that kind of stuff, but Marcus Freeman has shown a lot of promise. If Marcus Freeman is able to coach his best game of his, time at Notre Dame wins this game. But Kirby Smart has so much to overcome here. He has to overcome the quarterback situation. He has to overcome a defense that's not been quite as spectacular as maybe you're kind of used to a Georgia defense being this season. He has to overcome one of the best rushing attacks in all of college football with Riley Leonard, Jeremiah, all those guys. Like not just the quarterback, but the running backs and the dual threat of the running, not the dual running backs that they're able to put out there as well. There is so much
Mm-hmm.
that they have to overcome, but I have to believe Kirby Smart, with this much time, with this much of what he was able to do in the past and the way he was able to game plan and learning from Nick Saban, I have to believe this is going to be one of those closer games. And it just comes down to me, who's the better coach? Marcus Freeman, Kirby Smart. I think everybody says Kirby Smart, but if Marcus Freeman coaches the best game of his career, I think Notre Dame wins this game.
I really want to pull the trigger on Notre Dame, and I think the thing that, and Georgia will be healthy, and I think that is maybe a something to consider is that Georgia is going to be healthier, even with Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, right? Like
Right.
outside of that, like I think Trevor Etienne will be back. I think he was dinged up throughout the season. Their receivers will be healthy. The thing that really concerns me is there are some coaches where the time off really helps them, and there are some coaches where I'm like, oh man, I don't want Ryan Day off a bye.
Yeah. Saw that against Nebraska. That wasn't so hot.
Yeah. I want Kirby Smart with the bye.
Yeah.
And I think that's particularly with Mills being out on the defensive line. Like you look at Georgia's running attack, it doesn't scare you, right? They're averaging 4.2 yards per carry. But do they
Their
do
rushing
some
yards
things?
per game is 100th in the country.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah.
But do they finagle some things where Gunnar Stockton almost, in a sense, plays like Riley Leonard, where he's more of a zone read type of quarterback to pound away on a weakened defensive line that is going to be lighter. Like they're going to be giving up a lot of weight and a lot of girth in this game. I'm going to give my score prediction. I'm going to go 16-13 Georgia.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. It's going to be a low scoring one. And this one specifically for what David Greenshield here is pointing out. Does either of these teams really have a good passing game? No. Like even with Carson Beck, Georgia didn't have a great passing game. Riley Leonard, can pass the ball. Obviously, he's thrown for over 2,000 yards this year, but just barely. His threat really is more running the ball in this one, especially with those two running backs and what they're able to do. But the offensive line and the way they've coached them up, as much as I just went into all of the stuff about the coaching and everything else, like I think Kirby Smart is the better coach over Marcus Freeman. But I think in this one, Kirby Smart just has too much to overcome. He has too much to overcome with the defense. He has too much to overcome with Gunnar Stockton and everything else. Unless Gunnar Stockton just goes out there and starts throwing dots that I haven't seen him throw this season, but maybe he starts throwing them. Unless he does that, maybe something's different. But in this one, I think you're going to see a heavy running attack. I think you're going to see Georgia kick some field goals in this one. And I think that Notre Dame, with their running attack, is going to be able to get into the end zone. I think Notre Dame wins this one 21-20. And I think Marcus
21-20.
Freeman, I think Marcus Freeman has the best coaching job of his career in this game. Is able to outcoach Kirby. Maybe he pulls a fast one on Kirby somehow. I don't know. But I think in this one you're going to see the conversion in the red zone and the ability to kick the field goal, or the ability to not settle for field goals as the reason why Notre Dame wins this game.
I hope you're right, because I want to see death to the SEC. I don't care, but I think I certainly think it's possible. I just wish Mills, if Mills were in, I would probably reverse my score.
But like you said, they've been able to patch up the injuries all season long.
Yeah. And I do think, just one more note, I think Marcus Freeman is a better big game coach than he is a small game coach.
Yeah, I agree. He's been able to coach well in the big games. Few blunders here and there, but obviously he's trying to work through those things. I think Notre Dame was favored at the beginning for a reason.
Yep. Nope, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
So, all right. Dave Greenshield says 17-16 Georgia. Not really confident in that pick. I did not think that I'd be the one with the highest score prediction in this one, 2021, but here I am. It's going to be interesting. This is going to be a fun game to watch when we get to see it. So, all right. Hey, we're going to hit another commercial break really fast, and then we'll come back. We'll talk about the Penn State, Boise State game, and then we'll get on to Ohio State, Oregon, talk about that one and everything else. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Home Field is your go-to destination for premium collegiate apparel with a passion for comfort and a flair for vintage design. Home Field brings you gear that is comfortable and stylish. With over 150 colleges to choose from, Home Field digs deep into the archives, uncovering forgotten logos, iconic mascots, and legendary moments to create one-of-a-kind apparel. Use my code TBTH for 15% off for new customers, or use my link in the description. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle. Hey, if you don't catch us live, don't worry. You can always catch us on podcasts. We always post the podcast afterward. I do think we do a good job on YouTube, giving you graphics and everything like that you can kind of reference and look at while we're talking. But if you ever want to catch us, not live or something like that, catch us on the podcast. You can go on over the Big Ten Huddle podcast. Find us there. All right, Zach. Penn State's favorite in this one, 11.5. Boise State over Boise State. Over-under is 52.5 in this one. Vegas, obviously, very much favoring Penn State, as they were with SMU. This is going to be a tougher test than SMU, though, even though it's not at home or anything like that. This is going to be a neutral site game. Penn State will not have the crowd behind them. Zach, what's your thoughts going into this game? Does Boise State have a chance in this one? Is Penn State just, far and away the favorite? What's your thoughts in this one?
I think Penn State has to be careful, because I think I think they got very fortunate with SMU, right? SMU, they came in, Kevin Jennings was clearly rattled. They missed that 4th and 1. You can play the hypothetical game all you want, but the reality is Kevin Jennings hits that 4th and 1 throw. It's 7-0. Penn State's offense wasn't doing anything. And my concern is, do they kind of start in a funk again after, 10 days off and having to travel and not being at home? I think that could be rough, and I think Ashton Genty is the type of player that it doesn't matter what team he's on, he's going to make plays. We saw it against Oregon, right? He had over 200 yards against the Ducks. And granted, that was, I think, early in the season. They were a little discombobulated. But I think there's real danger if Penn State goes down, 7, 10, 14 nothing early, and then all of a sudden they have to play catch up. And while they were able to do it against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, I think there were some circumstances there that aided them to a degree. But I don't like Penn State's roster from the standpoint of, oh, you're down 14 nothing, you have to catch up. And Boise State has a player, unlike SMU, Boise State has a player that can make you pay and go 75 yards at any point. So that's my big concern in this game is, does Penn State have another slow start? And if so, does Boise State capitalize? If they do, the pressure then fully mounts on Penn State because you're the favorite. Everyone's told you have the easiest path to the playoff. Drew Aller did not play well last time out, but the cold affects everybody. It ain't going to be cold in the Fiesta Bowl.
No, it's not.
So yeah, go. You take it. You take it.
No, it's not. And that was something that I was going to talk about was, Penn State's offense. They will need to score in this one, in my mind, because Boise State's not going to turn the ball over and give away free points the way SMU was able to do. SMU, maybe they are better than Boise State. I don't know, but they threw the ball so much, and Penn State was able to capitalize on pick sixes and get those turnovers where Penn State's offense never really had to win the game for them in this one.
Yeah.
In this one, Boise State is not going to allow Penn State to just get turnovers, score, and make it easy from there. Yeah. Boise State is going to make Penn State have to drive the distance of the field, or at least a good amount of distance of the field, and win this game. And so this is where it comes down to Drew Aller, who did not have the best game last time, whether it was the cold, or he didn't trust his wide receivers, or he didn't want to give the game away. I mean, I've heard so many different things. Like, whatever reason it was, I mean, Zack, in that game, he had 5 passes of 10 yards or more. He didn't throw a single ball 20 yards or 20 yards deep or more. Like,
yep.
He was very, very conservative in that last game, whether it was because of the cold or he didn't want to give the game away again. Like I said, there's so many different things out there. But at the end of the day, like, Drew Aller is going to have a game similar to what he had against Oregon, where he is dealing, he's throwing the ball around, and he's making plays, because Boise State's not going to give it up to him. And at the same time, Boise State, as much as they are a Group of 5 team, like, they're second in the nation in sacks. 51 sacks, like I said earlier in the show, 51 sacks on the year. If this Penn State offensive line is not prepared for that, you could see pressure on Drew Aller in this one that could inhibit him from making plays. I think he got sacked 3 times against SMU. You can't let that happen in this game. The Penn State offensive line has got to be better, and some of that, was Drew Aller being indecisive and what he was doing as well. So I'm not putting all of it on the offensive line. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying here is Penn State's offense is going to have to move the ball. They're not going to be bailed out by Boise State giving the ball away like SMU did and all that kind of stuff. Penn State is going to have their offense move the ball on Boise State. I think they can running the ball, because guess what, Zack? Boise State is awful at tackling. I mean, just putrid. Awful.
Yep.
Their edges and one of their defensive tackles, Feely, they all have missed tackle rates of 25% plus.
Mm-hmm.
Both of their edges and one of their defensive tackles, which, these guys do oftentimes get some missed tackles because, they're being blocked while they're trying to tackle, but still, that's really high. And then 3 of Boise State's safeties would rank in the top 7 in missed tackle rate in the Big Ten. And that's with them being in the Mountain West. You don't see a whole lot of freaky athletes make you miss type of guys. in my mind, this is not a game that Drew Aller is going to go out and declare himself the best quarterback and all this stuff. This is a game where Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen show why they are still one of the best duo running backs in the nation, because you really haven't seen it as much lately. You saw it their freshman year, but not as much lately. And you see Boise State really struggle to tackle those two guys because Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, even though they've not shown, I still believe they are both very, very good, and they showed in that SMU game. But yeah, that's my thought. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, I think something to watch out for. Penn State defending the run is 7th in the country at just a hair over 100 yards per game. And they rush the ball for over 200 yards per carry and 5.3 yards per carry. Or 200 yards per game, 5.3 yards per carry. I don't think Boise has faced a running back tandem like this with an offensive line like this. And I say that knowing that they played Oregon, because Oregon was still trying to figure out offensive line combinations at that point. Oregon was not the Oregon that we know today. I think between that and play action, and Kotelnicki's offensive creativity, I don't think Boise State will be able to slow down Penn State's attack. I think Boise gets an early score, but I think Penn State knows the pathway to victory here is unlike SMU. I think with SMU, it was like, let Kevin Jennings go hot and cold and let him essentially let us win the game. Let him throw us, throw the game to us, basically. I think they know that they've got to be the bully in this game. If they get up 2 or 3 scores, it's over. Mm-hmm. Because outside of Genty, Boise State doesn't have the personnel to keep up. Like Maddox Madsen he's a nice player. Camper on the outside, he's a nice player.
Camper who played at IU last year,
yeah,
IU was not good last year.
Yeah,
good. This is their star wide receiver who played at IU.
Yeah, and he was a good player for IU. He's been a good player for Boise State, but he's not Penn State needs to play like the elite team that they want to be known as, and I think they will. I think it's going to be I think this will be the most lopsided out of all the playoff games in the second round.
So what's your score prediction then?
I'm going to go 38-13.
Wow.
Penn State.
Okay. I have this one a little bit closer. I think that there's going to be a lot of running the ball. So I don't think it's going to be as high scoring because of how much they're going to be running the ball. I think that Penn State needs to jump out in front quickly, but I just don't know if I see them doing that as quickly. But I think overall at the end of the day, Penn State's defense wins out against Ashton Genty, who has had an amazing year. And I'm not trying to disrespect him at all. He's had an amazing year, and he's had, he deserved to be second in the Heisman, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're going to see Penn State load the box. I think it was Penn State guy who said, they might even switch up their defense, run more of a 4-3 instead of a 4-2. I don't know. All I know is they're going to load that box because if you're Penn State, you can't be afraid of the wide receivers on the outside. Now, maybe Cam Camper makes some amazing plays and we see something happen, and that's how Boise State wins. I don't think that's how they win, but I just don't think it's likely. I think it's most likely Penn State loads the box, Boise State tries their best to run, and then they're just not able to do it. In Penn State, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen are able to run. Drew Aller, I don't think he'll have a bad game, but I don't think he'll put up, massive stats where it's like, oh, Drew Aller is one of the best players, because I don't think that's what you need to do in this game. With Boise State's inability to tackle, with everything else going into it, Penn State should be able to run the ball. It's going to be a little bit closer because I think Boise State will have a little bit of success at the end of the game with maybe a tired down defense, but I think this will kind of be like the Indiana Notre Dame game where it's a 10-point margin, but pretty decisively Penn State wins the game. I'm going to go 27-17 Penn State. Exact same score as the Notre Dame Indiana game.
That's fair.
But like that game, it won't seem like a close game because Penn State will win it.
Yep.
So. All right. Did we get score predictions? I apologize, guys. I wasn't watching the chat as much in this one.
PSU Jim had 35-17 Penn State over Boise State,
There we
thirty-five
go.
seventeen.
Penn State is going to put a lot of points on Boise State's defense. Penn State 35, Boise State 17. Listen, if the tackling is that bad and they're able to run all over them, I think they will. They
Yep.
could put a lot of points on them. We'll have to see.
Yep.
So, all right, very good, Zach. Let's talk about Ohio State and Oregon. Ohio State comes into this one. They are favored on FanDuel by 2.5 after losing the last one. This one, however, is in the Rose Bowl. It's a neutral site game. Last time was at Autzen Stadium in Oregon. A lot to unpack in this one. I don't really know how much we can look back at the last game because I do feel like there are so many differences between these teams. Ohio State does not have the same offensive line. Oregon brings back Jordan Birch. This Oregon team has grown and improved. Mateo Uiagalelei has been an amazing pass rusher all season. He didn't get a sack against Ohio State, but he's been amazing and very hard to stop in this season for Oregon. I mean, there's just a lot going into this game, and I don't even know where to start to evaluate it. I've started evaluating it in my mind so many times, and I'm like, well, you can't start there. You can't start there because there's so many different angles.
Mm-hmm.
Where have you started with it, Zach, and what are your thoughts on this game? Like, how have you evaluated it?
Listen, I've only been to one Ohio State game where they lost, so they're clearly going to win this game. No, I think I appreciate what you're saying because I think on one hand you can't go back because in some ways they're two different teams than 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago. You have Jordan Birch back. You have Sadiq at tight end for Oregon, who's really, really come on in the last several weeks. I mean, was big in that Penn State, the Big Ten championship game. So I think there's a lot there. At the same time, I think there are things that you can, again, similar to the bowl season conversation, that you can take away from that Ohio State Oregon game back in October. One was I felt like Autzen was going to be the difference maker in that game. And it was. Like, you go back and watch that game, some of the jittery snaps, right? Like, a couple times where Will Howard mishandled snaps.
Stole a complete drive away with the false starts and the crowd noise and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not going to be a factor in this game. Like, if for any Oregon fans who think that they're going to, outmaneuver Ohio State, it's not. It's going to be 50-50, most likely.
50-50 or 60-40, one of those two.
I might argue 60-40 for Ohio State. Ohio State fans travel to Pasadena. Like, they really do, especially when it's playoff. Like, for playoff games, they will travel. So, like, that's not a factor in this game. And I think the way that Ohio State came out against Tennessee is certainly encouraging. I think, I think the margins from, again, looking at the margins from the last game to this game, like, I think that favors Ohio State a little bit. The thing that concerns me, and it's what concerned me leading up to the Michigan game, was I feel like Ohio State's talking more about emotions than they are about schematics. And like Will Howard talking about getting another crack, and Jeremiah Smith not being over the offensive pass interference. And like, is that the same trap that they fell into with Michigan? Because if it is, I'm like, I don't know how much I like that. I think Oregon's talking a lot about the game and talking about, more about what they have to do to win the game. So I don't know. Like, I think I could be reading into
and that's the hard thing, right? Because that's like when you get into previewing and predicting a game, like, you can never preview and predict that. That's why nobody got the Michigan Ohio State game, right? Yeah. Because nobody could have predicted or previewed that Ryan Day would be in his own head and just completely abandon everything that had gone well, and the hit on Will Howard that, was it or was it not a concussion or whatever. Like, at the end of the day, like, nobody could have predicted that stuff, but it all happened, and it's all stuff that is valid to talk about. For me in this one, like, if there is a part of this game that needs to be talked about that I don't feel like people are talking about as much, that is very hard to predict. It's Dan Lanning's aggression and his willingness for high risk, high reward plays.
Yeah.
And I honestly think like that's what this game is going to come down to. Something that Dan Lanning does that is high risk, high reward. Does it work out for him? Is Ryan Day and Ohio State going to be able to counteract it? Because at the end of the day, I don't think Ohio State is going to allow Oregon to throw the ball over the top the way they were last time. Listen, going into the first 5 games of Oregon season, on throws of 20 yards or more, they were 8 for 17 with 3 touchdowns. Against Ohio State, they were 4 for 4 with a touchdown. Like that was something that Ohio State had a hard time predicting would happen. And hats off to Dan Lanning and Oregon that they were able to mask that for most of the season and then do it against Ohio State. It was a huge reason why they were able to win that game. But everything else, like, I think it comes down to some of the aggressive play calling that Dan Lanning does. We look at the onside kick thing that he did against Ohio State and say,
Yep.
genius, amazing job. We look at the 12 men on the field, which some people have called that cheating. I think you're stupid. I mean, it was a great job by Dan Lanning. Like he found a loophole in the rules and he went for it. Like, great job, you know? Like that's gamesmanship, whatever you want to call it. Like, I just think that's the way it is. But then I look at that Wisconsin game when he ran that fake field goal that they didn't get the conversion, and I'm like, thank goodness Braden Locke was the quarterback on the other side of the field in that one, because they weren't going to win. Now, if you pull something like that against Ohio State with Will Howard, Jeremiah Smith, Mecca Ibuka, like some of those guys on the other side of the field, I think Ohio State can respond to that.
Yep. Yeah.
But I think Oregon is a team that is built off of high risk, high reward, Dan Lanning's aggression, that kind of stuff. So he has to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But is it going to work out for him in this game as much? I know it's kind of a weird way to talk about it all, but to me, Dan Lanning at some point in this game is going to make a decision that is high risk, high reward. And that moment, because of how close this game is going to be, could decide the game and how it happens.
Yeah. I think with that, and that's, I think going back to that's where I think the last game is instructive. Because I think you saw the high risk, high reward. But here's the other thing. Oregon doesn't win that game if they don't flip the script with the onside kick.
Yeah.
Like from that point on, they were trading blows. Whereas before that, they were trying to catch up. And once they got to trading blows, that's when it felt like the momentum was more and more with Oregon. But before that, like Ohio State had been holding them to field goals. They had blocked an extra point, all that stuff. And I feel like for everyone saying that this is an even matchup talent-wise, I disagree. I think Ohio State's the more talented team. I don't think the talent disparity is stark. I think it's razor thin. So like I don't think it's, super.
Right. Oregon's
different.
Obviously a very talented team. Yeah.
But I think Ohio State has learned some lessons. Now I still, if you're asking me which coaching staff do you trust more, and this is probably me as a fan talking and still feeling scarred by Ryan Day. I trust Oregon's a little bit more. But
if things go the way they plan, though, right?
Yeah, right. But and here's my but. But here's where I am at the end of the day, where I'm starting to lean. As good as Oregon's skill is, and I think their lines are really good. Like I've just seen some of the cracks, against Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, like they went 3 road trips in 4 weeks. Like we talked about that. And this is the game though that I am very concerned about Oregon and how they start with a layoff. Because if you look at their game against, I think it was Liberty last year, they were really slow to start. I mean, Liberty had a lead, I think, early in that game, and they didn't really turn it up till the second quarter. Now, when they turned it on, they turned it on. I think Ohio State jumps early on this team, and I'm not sure Oregon will be able to match score for score with a revamped Ohio State defense that I think learned a lot of lessons from the first meeting. And I think the other thing in this game, I think Jeremiah Smith is on the ascension. He's ascending. And I just don't think there's a player that's better than him on the field. And I think Ohio State knows it. I think Oregon knows it. And I just don't think they're going to be able to stop him.
I think a lot of that comes down to the offensive line, right? Jeremiah Smith can be amazing on the outside, but if Will Howard doesn't have time to get the ball to him, if Derek Harmon is able to rip through the center of that defensive line or that offensive line, like the way Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant were able to do, if Mateo Uyunglele is able to speed rush around the tackles for Ohio State, which are both guards, but they're playing tackle. I mean, this is essentially 5 guards playing offensive line for Ohio State right now.
It's not great.
It's insane. But I mean, they made it work against Tennessee. So in Tennessee, I mean, our buddy from the last show who pointed out they have 8 NFL draft players on there. Like at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to Ohio State's offensive line. Can they give Will Howard the time, and can they run the ball? Because they didn't get a single first down in the second half against they didn't get a single first down in the second half against Oregon in that last game. I think that changes, but at the same time, is the offensive line any better? We'll see. I think Ryan Day and Chip Kelly are going to go for it more in the sense of tempo and that kind of action. So I think that'll be better. But at the end of the day, I know I keep saying at the end of the day, but it's hard to not feel like you have a solid point at the end each time. But it's going to come down to coaching.
Yep.
Both teams are extremely talented. Who, in my mind, is the better coach? Dan Lanning, Ryan Day. Who's going to have their team up ready to play better? I'm going to pick Ohio State to win this one, 24-22. I don't think it's
low scoring.
Well, I think Ohio State's defense is going to be more prepared for this one. I think they got hit in the mouth a little bit. I think they're going to be more prepared for this one, and I don't think it's going to get into the 30s. Even though it is going to be faster paced, and I think both teams are going to try to have a bit more tempo, I think it's going to be a little bit lower scoring. I don't think it's like a field goal at the end or something like that, but I think Dan Lanning does something a little crazy to get 22 points, but I think Ohio State, I think they win. Not confident in it, but I think they win. What do you think, Zach?
One other point. I think there is a decided advantage in that both Ryan Day and Chip Kelly have coached at the NFL level because of the way the playoff is structured. And like they're used to these longer seasons and having to manage rosters. And it's a small advantage, but I do think it is something to be aware of. Now, Dan Lanning might, they might come out and crush Ohio State and, be like, oh, well, whatever. Fire everybody. I am picking Ohio State. I don't feel great about it. Like it's actually in my head. I think it makes sense that Ohio State wins this game. I think in my heart, I'm like, I don't trust Ryan Day. I don't trust, I don't trust them in big games, yada, yada, yada. I think I look at everything surrounding the game though. And I'm like, I think if Ohio State corrects the defense, I don't see Oregon stopping Ohio State scoring at least 30. And actually, David Greenshield had my score, 35-27.
I haven't even been watching the chat. There we go.
Yeah. Like I just like, and I think your concerns about the offensive line are valid. That I have those same concerns. I saw them take on a really talented, like the front seven for Tennessee is legit. Like they
I just
are,
don't think that I don't think Tennessee's defensive tackles had quite the pass rushing ability that like a Derek Harmon has. That's my only thing. Like
yeah,
I think I mean we saw it on that run play when he was able to just rip the ball out of the hands of Quinshawn
yeah.
Judkins. Like I think Derek Harmon has a different element to him that's able to get into the backfield and burst through the offensive line. We'll see if Ohio State can shore that up better in this one. But anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I agree. Like I think Derek Harmon is probably the second or third best defensive tackle that they faced. Like Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. I think Zane Durant's pretty good in the middle for Penn State. But I think
Oops.
I I do think they have been able to mitigate good pass rushes. And, Michigan being the one exception, it wasn't even a pass rushing issue. It was a run blocking issue.
Right.
Um, so here's maybe my bold prediction. I think Travion Henderson has a big day in this game.
If Travion Henderson plays well in big games, oftentimes Ohio State wins.
Yep.
So, which is interesting. You pick Ohio State to win this time. Last time you picked Oregon to win, and you
Yep.
were correct on that. I forget what your score prediction was,
I
but
was 2 points off.
yeah,
I picked 34-31 Oregon.
yeah. Well, props to you for being so close. I hate that you were right, but
I was right too.
yeah. But we'll see. I don't know. They just like I know I'm gonna be labeled a homer for picking Ohio State, but like, and every single time I've come back to this, like, I think Ohio State has it. I think they do. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is not at Autzen. And I
Yeah.
remember last time we played, like, I remember when Ohio State was going out to Autzen, every Oregon fan talked about how much of a home field advantage Autzen is. And now they want to act like, oh, well, it wasn't a home field advantage at all. It's like, well, pick a lane, right? Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can't, when you play there, act like it was the biggest home field advantage in the world. And now people are using it in their analysis to say, well, they don't have the Autzen home field advantage anymore. It's like, oh, it wasn't a home field advantage. Oregon's still going to win. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's so many elements to this game. It would honestly take like a 2 hour long podcast to talk about every single one of them,
Yeah.
with how much they've gone in my mind. But
Yeah.
Doug Shepard with Ohio State 49, Oregon 19. Ohio State has woken and gonna win it all.
I
Doug, if that happens, I don't know what I'll buy you, but I shouldn't say anything because I don't have enough money to buy you very much. But still, that would be crazy if you got that right.
Yeah. I do I think I think there's a pathway for both teams to blow each other out, right? Like I think Oregon if they get up on you, they want to keep scoring. But I do think there is a pathway where Ohio State plays its A game. And I think that like Oregon outside of Tennessee, the Oregon game was probably the best Ohio State played all year. But at least offensively, and I felt like defensively they left a lot to be desired. I'm curious what happens if Ohio State plays their A game on both sides of the ball. Because I think we've been saying for the past several weeks, Oregon's the best team in the country. And I think their resume bears that out for sure. But I want to see Ohio State play their best. Because I think Oregon is the best or the second best team in the country, like left in the field. Like I don't have a doubt about that. Like they're the most balanced offense, defense, special teams. I think they're consistent and they are dynamic and they're physical. What can Ohio State do with their A game? And that's what I want to know is can Ohio State play their A game? And if so, does Oregon beat that? And I think they can, but I'm not sure they like I think they could, but I'm not sure they will.
Yeah, I think this game will most likely decide whoever's the national champion.
Yep.
I think if Ohio State wins, Ohio State is probably going to win the national championship. If Oregon wins, Oregon is probably going to win the national championship. I say probably because there's other factors and stuff like that that you can never really predict, but I think you're seeing the best two teams in the country.
Yep.
In this game.
Yep.
In my opinion.
In the Rose Bowl.
In the Rose Bowl, which should be the national championship game location every single year because it is the best, location, but,
Yeah.
It is what it is. So, all right, Zach, well done. Well done. I think we put in a solid day's work there, a solid night's work there.
There we go.
Nearly an hour and a half. We talked about the transfer portal. We talked about the bowl games. We talked about the college football playoffs round 2. Anything else you want to bring up before we get out of here?
Listen, if anybody has any good food recommendations out in Pasadena, hit me up.
Yeah, because Zach's going out there.
Yeah,
he needs to know.
I need to know. I don't know what to do. Drive to the stadium. That's what I'll do. I'll do that.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Tomorrow, I haven't confirmed with Kent yet, but Kent should be able to come on for a Power Rankings episode tomorrow morning around 10 a.m. So catch us there. I will be on with Sunny Verma from Locked On Illini doing Power Rankings and talking about some Illini basketball and Big Ten basketball and stuff like that. So tomorrow, if you want to check out that would be awesome too. But anything else? That's all I got. So, Zach, anything else before we get out of here?
No. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. I should say one more thing. I will be on with Ryan Winters on Tuesday night on his show, Sports Chat 503. If I feel up to it, I will do a post game of Penn State, Boise, and all the other Big Ten games and stuff like that. But it'll probably just be me by myself unless I can find somebody else to come on. I know Zach probably won't be able to with the Rose Bowl and everything else. He'll be traveling out there, but we will try to figure something else out. But if you want to, check out Sports Chat 503 Tuesday night, 8:30 Eastern time. I'll be live over there with Ryan Winters, and I will try to go live after the Penn State game. We'll see, but we'll have to see how awake I am because it could be really, really, really late. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. We appreciate it. Have a good one.